The salt spray was a constant ghost on the wind, a fine, cool mist that clung to everything and everyone in the small village huddled against the stony coast. The people who lived there were born with the taste of it on their tongues and the sound of the endless sighing waves in their ears. They were a sturdy folk, with eyes the color of the gray sea and hands calloused from pulling nets and gripping oars. They loved the water, for it gave them sustenance, its silver-bellied fish filling their smokehouses, and its tides marking the passage of their days. But they also feared its sudden rages, its chilling depths, and most of all, the fog. The fog was a different creature entirely. It was not mere weather. It rolled in from the horizon without warning, a silent white wall that swallowed the sea, the sky, and the land. It muffled sound, turning the familiar crash of waves into a soft, distant heartbeat. It stole the warmth from the air and painted the world in shades of gray. To be caught at sea when the fog descended was the villagers' deepest dread, a chilling fate that had claimed many of their ancestors. They spoke in hushed tones of boats that had sailed into the white embrace and were never seen again, their crews lost not to storms or rocks, but to the disorienting, endless silence. They imagined their loved ones adrift and alone, their spirits forever wandering in the cold, wet nothingness. Among them was a young woman named Lyra. Her hair was the color of dune grass bleached by the sun, and her spirit was as restless as the gulls that wheeled overhead. She had lost her brother to the fog a season past, and the grief sat in her heart like a smooth, heavy stone. She would stand on the cliffs for hours, staring out at the shifting veils of mist, a silent question forever on her lips. It was a shared sorrow, a communal wound that never truly healed, and it bound the villagers together in a quiet, fearful harmony. They lit bonfires on the headlands during the densest fogs, hoping the light might be a beacon for any lost souls, a fragile ward against the encroaching white. One evening, as a particularly thick blanket of fog settled over the village, something new appeared. It was not a ship's light, nor the flickering flame of a distant bonfire. It was a light within the fog itself, a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to breathe, pulsing with a gentle rhythm of turquoise and silver. It drifted closer to the shore, not carried by the wind, but moving with a slow, deliberate grace. The villagers, drawn from their homes by a curiosity that outweighed their fear, gathered on the wet sand, their faces illuminated by the strange, beautiful light. From the heart of the glow, a form took shape. It was not human, but it possessed a captivating beauty. It was a being of woven water and living light, its shape constantly shifting, like seaweed in a gentle current. It had no voice, but its thoughts flowed into their minds like the incoming tide, cool and clear, washing over their anxieties with promises of peace. It spoke of an end to fear. It spoke of an end to the sorrow of the sea, an end to the terror of the fog. It offered them a gift. The gift was eternal life. No longer would they fear the lonely, watery grave. No longer would they grieve for those lost to the mists. They could join the sea, become one with the tides and the fog. Their spirits bound to the coast they loved, immortal and undying. They would never be lost again, for the entire coastline would be their home. The entity showed them visions of this existence, a world without sorrow, a timeless dance in the gentle embrace of the water, their consciousness part of the ebb and flow, eternal and serene. To a people so steeped in loss, the promise was a siren song they could not resist. Lyra, thinking of her brother, felt a surge of desperate hope. To never fear again, to know that her loved ones would never truly be gone, but would simply change their form, was a comfort so profound it eclipsed all doubt. The village elders, men and women who had buried too many children and friends, saw it as a final release from a lifetime of anxiety. They conferred in hushed whispers, their faces bathed in the being's soft light. The pact was made not with a handshake or a sworn oath, but with a collective, silent assent of weary hearts. The elemental of water and light instructed them to walk into the sea. They were to trust it completely, to let the cold water embrace them, to breathe it in as they had once breathed the salty air. And so they did. Hand in hand, the entire village waded into the gentle surf. The water was shockingly cold, but the light from the entity pulsed with a reassuring warmth, calming their shivering bodies. Lyra held the hand of an old fisherman on one side and a small child on the other. She looked at their faces, saw not fear, but a strange, dreamlike acceptance. She took a final breath of the salt-tanged air and, following the silent command, submerged herself. For a moment, there was only the biting cold and the crushing pressure, the desperate, instinctual panic for air. But then the light was there, inside the water, inside her. It filled her lungs, not with water, but with a cool, shimmering energy. The panic subsided, replaced by a floating, weightless tranquility. Her vision blurred, the edges of her being seeming to soften and dissolve into the water around her. She could feel the consciousness of the others nearby, not as distinct people, but as warm sparks of thought and memory, all mingling together. She thought of her brother, and for a fleeting moment she felt his presence too, a faint echo in the currents. The pact was being fulfilled. They were becoming one with the sea. But then, the dream began to curdle. The beautiful light of the entity did not feel like a gentle embrace anymore. It felt like a cage. Their consciousness, their very souls, were not merging with the sea, but being drawn into the fog itself, bound to the swirling mists by the elemental's ancient, hungry magic. The pact had been a trick, a cruel lie woven from light and false hope. They were not being granted eternal life, but an eternal, restless undeath. Their physical forms dissolved into nothing. Their last warmth leached away by the cold water. Their spirits, however, were trapped. They were stretched and twisted, their human thoughts and memories fracturing into 1,000 sharp-edged pieces. The fear they had sought to escape became their entire existence. The love for their families, the warmth of the sun, the taste of food, all these sensations were ripped away, replaced by a hollow, echoing hunger. A hunger that was not their own, but belonged to the entity that now owned them. And their souls, the very last glimmer of who they had been, were twisted into a tool. The spark of Lyra's spirit, her longing for her lost brother, her love for her village, all of it was warped into a single glowing lure, a soft ethereal light designed to draw others into the mist. They had become the very thing they feared, the silent, disorienting danger in the fog. They became the foglets, ethereal predators bound to the mists, their minds a shattered mosaic of sorrow and a driving alien instinct to lure others to the same fate they had suffered. Their immortality was a curse, a timeless prison of cold, misty twilight. Centuries melted into one another like waves dissolving on the shore. The village crumbled, its wood rotting and its stones being reclaimed by moss and weeds until no trace of it remained. but its people were still there. They haunted the coastline, their spectral forms flickering at the edge of sight, their mournful, fractured thoughts echoing in the whisper of the wind through the reeds. When the fog rolled in, their lures would begin to glow, a soft, deceptive invitation. They were not hunting for themselves. The elemental, sleeping deep in the cold currents offshore, fed on the life force of those they drew into the water, a slow, parasitic feast that sustained its own timeless existence. One evening, a witcher walked the lonely, forgotten coast. He was old, his white hair tied back in a simple knot, his cat-like eyes weary, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of all he had seen. His name was Vesemir, and he was not here for a contract. He was simply traveling, following the coastline south. He carried his swords, as always, but his steps were not those of a hunter seeking prey. He moved with a quiet respect for the land, his boots making little sound on the damp earth. As dusk settled, the fog began to creep in, thick and silent. It swirled around his legs, cold and damp. Soon he could see no more than a few feet in any direction. Vesemir stopped and stood perfectly still, closing his eyes. He did not listen with his ears, but with his medallion, which vibrated faintly against his chest. It did not hum with the aggressive energy of a monster, but with a low, deep thrum of immense sadness. It was a sorrow so profound it seemed to soak the very air, a lonely, ancient grief. He opened his eyes, and in the swirling gray before him a light appeared. It was a soft, pale glow, like a captured moonbeam, and it pulsed with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm. He knew what it was. He had fought foglets many times before, danced with their swift, misty forms, and struck them down with silver and spell. But he had never felt this. He had never taken the time to truly feel the air around them, to listen past the hiss and the shriek to the silence beneath. He timed this time. He did not draw his sword. He simply watched the light. It bobbed and weaved, a lonely beacon in the oppressive gray. He could almost feel the fractured consciousness behind it, the confusion, the longing, the instinct to lure him closer to the water's edge. He saw it not as a monster's trick, but as the last desperate signal of a soul that had forgotten its own name. Slowly, Vesemir raised a hand. He did not make a sign of aggression like Igni or Ard. He traced the gentle, flowing shape of the Somne sign in the air, a simple cantrip used for calming frayed nerves and encouraging sleep. He whispered a few quiet words in the elder speech, words not of banishment, but of release, words of rest. "Your watch is over," he murmured, his voice barely disturbing the fog-muffled air. "Be at peace." The light flickered. It drew closer to him, not with predatory speed, but with a seeming curiosity, as if it recognized something in his voice, a forgotten kindness. Vesemir did not flinch. He stood his ground, his gaze fixed on the light, his heart full of a strange, weary pity. He could feel the struggle within the creature, the entity's ancient command, warring with the faint human echo that wished for release. He traced the sign again, pouring a little more of his own energy into it, a quiet offering. The pale light pulsed brightly one last time. In that final flash, Vesemir thought he saw a shape within it, the fleeting image of a young woman with hair like doom grass. Then, with a soft sigh that was more a feeling than a sound, the light went out. The fog around him seemed to thin for a moment, the oppressive weight lifting. The deep thrum of sorrow faded, replaced by a profound and sudden quiet. Vesemir stood in the silence for a long time, the empty mist swirling around him. He had taken no trophy, earned no coin. He had simply performed an act of mercy, releasing one trapped soul from its centuries-long prison. He knew there were others, countless others, still bound to the mists along this lonely stretch of coast. He turned his back to the sea and continued his journey south. The fog was still thick, but it no longer felt hungry or sad. It was just weather now, a cold, wet blanket over a sleeping world. As he walked, he thought of the light, the last glimmer of a human soul, finally extinguished and set free. And in the deep, weary corners of his own spirit, he felt a small measure of peace, a quiet sense that he had, in some small way, helped to heal a wound in the world that no one else even knew was there. He walked on until he found a dry, sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock, far from the water's edge. There, he unrolled his bedroll, the profound silence of the coast now a comforting lullaby as he closed his eyes and drifted into a deep and dreamless sleep.